Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I have another Photoshop full edit tutorial where I show you my process from beginning to end, covering dodge and burn, my color grading, and also how I use the infinite color panel to finalize the colors. This is going to be more of an intermediate tutorial, but don't worry if you're a beginner. I still love you guys. I have beginner level videos from dodge and burn, frequency separation, and how I use selective color for my color grading. If you're new to the channel, consider following me on Instagram because I post a lot of helpful content like behind the scenes photos. I also go live on Instagram and do edits in Capture One and Photoshop and show you the entire process at the raw level. I have some dedicated videos on IGTV where I show you my raw processing steps as well. Before we start, I do want to thank my brother from another mother, Mr. Marco Gilpas, who's probably watching Unmesh's tutorials right now. He's real savage, man. He's savage like that. And also Fernanda for also being the model as well. So now let's go ahead and cover todo el pedo. If you guys were curious what the raw photo looked like and what I did in Capture One to get to this point, I do have a video on IGTV that shows my entire raw process. So to begin, I'm going to get a cleanup layer, and I'm going to run, it's basically just a duplicate of the background layer. And step number one for me is going to be to remove any type of blemishes that might be in the image. Now there's a couple of little areas here with the hair that I'm going to remove, and just a few pimples that I'm just going to adjust. The main tool I'm going to use for this is going to be the healing brush, and in order to use it, all I'm going to do is hold Alt on the keyboard, and I am going to just sample other pixels from the opposite side and just brush right over. I will be fast forwarding this part because I'm sure most people already know how to do this, and then we'll continue with the dodge and burn. Let me know in the comments if you guys would want me to make a beginner level video on how to remove blemishes. I'm curious to know your feedback. The key thing with dodge and burn is I'm going to be using the helper layer to really assist me to find the transitions that I need to smooth out. My settings in the brush is going to be 100% opacity and 1% flow. I did already make a dedicated video on dodge and burn, so if you're new to dodge and burn or not sure what this concept is, I'm going to have either the link up here or in the description below so you can watch that. I do have the action there for free as well. So what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of dodge and burn for maybe about a minute or two, and then we'll kind of continue and we'll get into the color grading. But this is what I was referring to, is using my helper layer to really guide and assist me to kind of really make sure that I can see these inconsistencies so that I can really have a better opportunity to get a great dodge and burn. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with dodge, and I'm going to look for inconsistencies like right here and just kind of smooth these out with the brush tool. And I'm going to make sure I switch my brush to the todo el pedo, and I am using a Wacom Tablet. So consider that when you're doing your dodge and burn. To me, it's very important to use that, but it's going to be really up to you guys. Remember, it's important to zoom in and out as you're doing the dodge and burn process, and adjust your helper layers as you see fit. So lately I've been going back and forth whether or not to use frequency separation. I went through a phase where I wasn't using it for a while, and then lately I've been getting back into it. I've been adjusting my mixer brush settings to kind of fit the workflow that works best for me. So if you're curious as to why I didn't do frequency separation, it was at that time where I was like, I'm just going to stick to dodge and burn. So use whatever skin method works best for you. One of the things that I love to do is really get this line to meet up here. And it really gives me a better representation of where I really need to dodge and burn. So I like to make it a little bit more dramatic here. And this is really going to show me the tones. All right, let's take a look at a little bit of the before and after of what I've done so far. This has been my dodge, and this has been my burn. Let me hold Alt on the layer mask so you guys can see where exactly I've brushed. That's my dodge, and this is my burn. Now, more than likely, I probably could take my time a little bit more and get a little bit more detail, but I think for this tutorial, I think you more or less get the idea of what the dodge and burn process is like. What I'm going to get to next is the global. So I'm going to add a dodge and burn, or another dodge and burn. So I'm going to add a dodge, and then I'm going to add another burn. So I'm adding them separate from my normal dodge and burn, because what I do here is when I get my brush, I increase the flow anywhere from like 4 to 5. So in this case, I'm going to go 4. I'm going to zoom out. And what I'm going to do is I am going to add just a little bit more highlight pop to where the highlights naturally are. And I am specifically going to get a little bit closer on the lips. And we're going to add a little bit of shine to the lips. Okay. I'm going to switch to my burn now. And remember that I'm on the global, so I'm brushing just a little bit darker now with the 4% flow. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to add a little bit more shadow into this cheekbone using a darker brush. Same thing down here to the side of the nose. Okay, and maybe just a little bit here on the nose part here. So let's kind of take a look at the before and after of what I got here with the dodge or the burn. So now that I've done the burn, if I feel like I went too far, which probably did a little bit, I'll just go down a little bit, 85% opacity. So that's what's cool about that. Go to 86. And then I'm also going to go back into dodge, and I'm going to add a little bit of pop to the hair. So I'm going to change the flow now to, let's go 10. And I'm going to add just a little bit of pop to the hair. Only brushing in where there is highlights, or trying my best to where there's only highlights. There we go. Cool, and then I'm going to zoom into the eyes now. Hit the brush tool. Add a little bit of highlight there, a little bit of light here. Good. There we go. I'm going to zoom out, Command minus. I'm going to group the dodge and burn so that I can see what the global looks like. So this is the global. Let me zoom in, because I know a lot of you guys like to see it better when I'm zoomed in. So let's see. That's the before and then the after. This is global. And this is the local. Okay, so let's look at the whole thing together right here, before and the after. Just a small subtle effect. I like those results. So now we'll go ahead and move on to the color grading. Before I set the colors in the image, I like to use a luminosity with selective color so that I can adjust the tones. I do have a dedicated video on how selective color works and what the CMYK on how these percentages work. So link will be up at the top or in the description. So the numbers that I used for this under the reds, I was at -6, -6, 11, and -4. Then I went into the yellows, and I went 39 on the cyans, 2, and then 5, and then 0. And then on the blues, I adjusted it to 5, 4, 38, and 24. So let's take a look at the before and after. Just with the luminosity tone levels, it just made things a little bit darker, kind of really set the base for the initial colors. So now I'm going to go into the selective color now. I'm going to invert the mask by pushing Control and then I on the keyboard. That's going to invert the mask, so none of these effects are showing up. And I'm going to brush on the skin tone, because this is where I want the color grade to go. So I'm going to hit the backslash key so I can see exactly where this is going to show up. And I want it to be showing up only in the skin tone. So backslash, so you could see the mask, brushing with white. So now I'm telling Photoshop, when you do the color grade, this is more or less where I want that to be appearing. And I don't have to be super precise because I'm going to be targeting the reds and the yellows, so that those are the only areas that I'm going to be selectively adjusting. So I'm going to go ahead and click the selective color here, and I'm going to go to the properties. Now typically red and yellow are going to be the numbers that you want to adjust when you're doing skin tone. So for the reds, it was -7, 1 and 2. So -7, 1 and 2. And just as a general rule of thumb for me is I try to keep these numbers between 8 and below. If I go any higher than that, I'm at risk of maybe going a little bit too far, which I do from time to time. So 2 and then 3 and then 4. And once again, guys, I do have a video dedicated to how selective color works. So if I click the before and after, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see this. It's just a very, very, very subtle effect. But if I zoom in, you'll see this is the before and then the after, very, very subtle. This didn't need a lot of color treatment. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to be around this range. And now we're going to go into the color balance, which is another favorite tool that I like to use for my color grading. So for the mids, I went all the way to -13 to really add those yellow tones. And then under the shadows, I went to 4 on the blues, -2 on the magentas, and then on the highlights, -2, and then -3. So if I zoom out, what that really did, especially the midtones, is that it really added these nice yellow tones, because this was a golden hour photo shoot. And so by making the midtones a little bit more yellow, it kind of emphasized that golden hour vibe that I was going for. Now I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of pop in my highlights by using the levels set to luminosity. Under the layers panel, I'm going to go down here to the adjustment layers, and I'm going to go to levels, but I'm going to switch it to the luminosity blend mode so that it doesn't affect the colors. It's just going to affect the luminosity and the tones. So looking at the histogram here, I can see that there's not a lot of highlights. So when I drag this to the left, you're going to notice that the highlights are starting to pop just a little bit more. Now it's going to be up to you guys on how much you guys want your image to pop. So I'm going to probably go somewhere about right about here will be just fine. The next step is to add a curves adjustment so that I can adjust the colors using the different channels, the reds, greens, and magentas. Now, if you want me to make a dedicated curves video on how I color grade and how I set tones, let me know. That's a video I've been debating whether to make within the past couple of days. So I'm going to go down here to the layers panel. I'm going to go to the adjustments layer icon. We're going to go to curves, and then we're going to go into the reds channels, and I have some preset numbers that I saved for this. So I'm just going to make a dot. And then for the input, I did 61, and then output, I did 58. And then in the greens, I did 128 and 121 on the output. And then under the blues, I did 62, and then I did 53. So if you're wondering how these little channels work, basically, I can go into the reds, greens, and blues, and I can color grade the midtones, shadows, and the highlights. So that's what I did with those numbers. So if I click the before and then the after, this is what I added to the image. Now you'll notice that it looks a little bit more yellow, but the problem that I have is that I didn't necessarily want it in my highlights. It's making my highlights a little bit too golden, at least for my taste. Now this is subjective. You might like the way it looks there. Maybe you might say, you know what, I want to adjust the opacity and you can bring it down. That's totally fine. But what I did instead was I double clicked in this little blank spot here on the layers. What you're going to get is your layer style properties, and there's something here called the blend if, where it says underlying layer. And I told you that I didn't want it in my highlights. So down here, I can target my highlights, and as I reduce this down, you're going to see that the color grade is being removed in the highlights. And I can determine at what point do I want it to show up. So if I drag it here, what I'm telling Photoshop is that I want it to start my midtones all the way up into my darks. So in this specific example, I want it around this range, and it's going to have kind of this hard edge right here that you can see. Doesn't look very good. So I'm going to hold Alt, and then I'm going to drag it across so it can feather out that effect. So right about here looks pretty good. And now if I click the before and after, it's only really adding those golden tones into my shadows. So if I still thought it was too strong, I could always lower the opacity. So in this example, I'll probably lower it down. Let's lower it down to about 85, and I think that looks pretty good. So let's look at the overall before and after. Let's zoom in right here so you can really see the colors and you can see the skin retouching. I'm going to hold Alt, before, and then the after. When I was first color grading this image, I noticed the sun in the background and I really wanted to add more richness to those colors. So what I ended up doing is I ended up setting my blend mode to soft light and brushing in color specifically in the sun. So to do that, we're going to go to the layers, and I'm going to hit this adjustment layer icon again. We're going to go to solid color. And the color that I used, I wrote down the code here. It's a top secret code. I'm just joking. It's just a little hex code. So it was 400 and then beam. And this is kind of like the rustic orange that I want. So I hit OK. And you're probably looking at this like, what the heck is going on here? So if I set the blend mode to soft light, you'll notice that it adds this kind of beautiful richness to the image. Now, of course, it's doing it to the entire thing. So we're going to invert the mask. So let's do that. We're going to go invert by pressing Control and then I. And now I have full control on where I want to see that rustic tones there. So now I'm going to go and get the white brush. I'm going to lower down my flow to maybe about 33 and just slowly brush this in to this area over here. Okay. Now, if I want to be more precise, obviously I can take my time and be precise, but I think you guys are getting the general idea of where I'm getting these colors. So right there probably is a little bit too much, and I might have it a little bit off as far as like where I'm brushing. So I'm just going to brush. I'm just going to kind of slowly fade this here. I think I got the hand just a little bit. I'm also going to fade the top part just a little bit. We don't want to get too cute here. And then I'm gonna lower the opacity to a number that looks pretty good. So let's try maybe 70. Let's zoom in and let's take a look. So let's hit the eyeball before and then the after. I feel like, I'm gonna lower it down just a little bit. Each image is gonna be a little bit different, but I don't wanna overdo it here. And let's try 50. I think 50 looks good. We're almost done with the image. We're gonna get into the camera raw settings, adding some vignette, and then we're gonna finish it off with the infinite color panel. I'm gonna go to my actions, the Ra Vato Loco. We're gonna hit the play button. Basically what this is gonna do, it's gonna merge everything and make it into a smart object. So once I kind of finished all my toning and my exposure adjustments, I like to come back in to camera raw to make some final tweaks to the image. So I'm gonna let that run. It's gonna take some time. And then we get into the camera raw filter. Now I already saved the settings that I used to make this a little bit faster. So I'm gonna load those up. And it should be under Fernanda YouTube field. Here we go. So let's take a look at the settings. I added a little bit of contrast, brought down the blacks a little bit. I'm gonna bring up the clarity up to maybe 2. I had the vibrance at 3. Brought the lights up 2 there. And then on the luminance, I targeted the oranges and I made them just a little bit brighter at 2 and the yellows as well. Saturation, I brought the blues to 3, and then I adjusted the blues, made them a little bit more teal at -13, -9 on the purples. Highlights, I added just a little bit of blues and a little bit of brown-ish tones into the shadows. Added a little bit of grain, and then here I'm going to add just a little bit of vignetting to the image. Not too much, let's go about 6. And then I did the calibration. This is like a very helpful section for color grading, especially the blue primaries, the saturation. So I used that. So let's take a look at the before and after here. Not much of a difference. You'll see that there's a little bit more orange tones, a little bit more red tones that I achieved, but nothing super dramatic. But I usually like to do this just as a little final touch to the image. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. This next step is optional. Sometimes I get stuck when I'm color grading and I'm not sure which direction I want to go with in my color grade. So using the infinite color panel gives me options that I might not have thought about. So in Photoshop, I do have it installed. Here's the infinite color panel. And the way it works is that I can randomize certain color grades. And this was created by one of my friends named PRATIK. I think we're friends. I hope we're friends. I don't even know if he's watching. You can go here into the lights, and I like to just put create, and I can select which things I want to randomize. If I hit create, it'll randomly give me different looks, and sometimes you'll notice that certain colors pop and you might get a vibe that you like. So there was one specific color grade that I really liked, and I saved it into my libraries, which was this one here, and I'm gonna go ahead and drag it in. And this is the one that I liked. I actually liked what it did to the sky, not necessarily what it did to the grass and her skin tone. And this is what it ended up adding, which was a color lookup, a color balance, and then a curves. Now I specifically want to target the blues. So what I did is I added a layer mask, and then I went to image, apply image, and then I went into the blues channel so that it can apply in the blues. So when I hit OK, it's going to make a little mask over here to the side. And if I hit the before and then the after, you'll notice that it adds this kind of blue tint to the image. Now keep in mind, this is optional. This is something that you don't have to do, but it is a nice little trick that I like to do when I'm using the infinite color panel. And then I used an additional one. This was the second one that I added. I'm going to go ahead and drag this one in. And this one, I specifically liked the color lookup, the color balance, and then the curves. Now on this one, same thing. I like what it did to the background sky. And then I just added a layer mask. I inverted it by pressing Ctrl-I. Got the white brush so that I could specifically target where I want to brush. And I only brushed in that little blue color grade where I wanted to see it. Now this one was a very subtle effect. I only had it set to 20% opacity. If I wanted to, I could have been more dramatic and then had it all the way at 100. That was obviously too much, but it gives you that flexibility of seeing where you want to go with it. So I'm going to hold shift on the infinite color panel. Remember that this is optional. You don't have to actually use this. You might have liked the way it looked before or in the after. Doesn't really matter, but it gives you that second option. After taking a break and coming back to the image, I wasn't happy with the colors. It was a little bit too yellow for me. And I sent it to Marco and he saw that the hand was a little bit too red. So it's always a good idea to send the photo to a friend just for final touch-ups. So what I did is I came back into Photoshop. I went to Selective Color. I targeted the reds because I wanted it a little bit more red in the skin tone. I felt like it was a little too yellow. And by adding the reds and dragging it to -7, it's adding red into the cyans. Dragging it +5 will add some magentas. -1 to kind of tone down those yellows, and then to darken up the reds a little bit, I added at +1. Then I targeted the yellows, which was a part of the problem. I went to -5 to add reds into the yellows, magentas +6, and then just a little bit of those yellows brought it back. So this is the before and then the after just on the skin tone. And then Marco brought up the hand, which he said that it was a little bit too red, which I agreed that the skin tone wasn't matching up. So I added a curves layer to kind of balance out those two. All I did is I went into the reds and I brought it down. And then I went into the blues and I brought that down as well. And then I can always lower the opacity if I needed to. So I think about 90 looks good. So this is the adjustment. I'm going to group it. And let me zoom out here. This is the adjustment. And then the after. It also added these kind of nice red tones to the image. So it almost kind of looks like fire almost. So I kind of like that I added those red tones into it. So you can decide. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. Maybe you guys like the yellow one first. Maybe you like the red. But this is the final image that I think I'm happy with. And now let's take a look at the final image overall and compare it to the before and after. So I'm going to hold Alt on the background there. So before and then the after. I'm going to zoom in so you can see more details. The before and then the after.
Whew! Done with another full edit tutorial. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.